should probably go ahead and get started. Please remember to type your answer in the chat box, even if you're just getting going this morning. Okay, and then also remember, I don't hear any background noise, but if you are not speaking at the moment, go ahead and turn off your computer speakers and your microphone to mute any background noises. And then remember, if you do want to say something, to go ahead and make sure you unmute yourself. So welcome everybody back to the Adaptation Planning and Practices online course. This week it will be myself, Patricia Leopold, and also Leslie Brandt presenting your lecture. Leslie's giving everyone a wave right now. And then the discussion today will be hosted by Danielle, Shannon, Leslie, and myself. And for those of you in tomorrow's session, your hosts will be Maria, Kaylee, and Todd. So our agenda today includes a brief recap of step number 4, and then an introduction to step number 5, which covers monitoring. And then at that point, I'll hand it off to Leslie, who will walk us through a tutorial on using the workbook. And then finally, she'll give us a summary of work to be completed before our next class. So last week we started step 4, which is identifying management strategies and approaches and developing specific tactics for our management plans. We also discussed the importance of capturing all of your ideas and then weighing the benefits against the drawbacks and barriers before finally selecting the most practicable tactics for implementation. We also had an opportunity to slow down and consider if we need more resources for this step, or if we're feeling pretty well equipped to move ahead. And the main goal of step number 4 was to identify what actions can address those anticipated changes and help meet your management goals. Last week, we presented a hierarchy of adaptation actions. At the highest level, we introduced these broad concepts of resistance, resilience, and transition. And we asked you to roughly identify where you fall on that spectrum and whether you're trying to keep things pretty much the same or push a system into alignment with current or anticipated conditions. And then we asked you to choose a menu of adaptation strategies, for example, the forests or the forested watersheds menu, and use that to identify even more specific ways to help your system adapt. For example, from the forested watersheds menu, we can select a strategy such as strategy 1, sustain fundamental ecological functions and hydrologic processes, because this strategy would make sense for our goals, presumably. And from that strategy, we can then choose one of the approaches that best fit our projects, such as approach 1.1, maintain and enhance infiltration and water storage capacity of forest soils. And then we develop a much more specific way to implement that approach, such as to harvest and retain down wood to improve soil conditions. That's just one potential tactic under this approach, because we can't even begin to list all the possible tactics here, because they will be unique to your site and your management objectives. These are your own detailed solutions for your own projects, and will include the what, when, where, and how details of implementation. And following this hierarchy really helps create this clear linkage between the why and the how. It helps set the context for both your strategy and your specific actions in response to climate change. And it will help make the case to your colleagues and your stakeholders that implementing this tactic serves a bigger purpose and improves our chances of success in reaching our management goals. And then in summary, that's where we left off on step number 4 last week. So before we move on to step number 5, are there any questions about step number 4? Is everybody making good progress? And don't forget to unmute yourself. Okay, we'll have more opportunities during discussion to ask questions about step number 4. So then let's review where we are this week. In our first week, you defined your goals and objectives. Then in step number 2, you assessed your vulnerabilities. Then we evaluated goals and objectives given those anticipated changes. And then last week, you started developing adaptation tactics that address your challenges and capitalize on your opportunities. So this week, you will brainstorm ways to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of those selected tactics. And as you start to complete the adaptation workbook, you can also practice exporting your workbook to a PDF or a Word document. And this will help you visualize how each step is helping to communicate this intentional adaptation. And Leslie will show you how to do that in the tutorial part of this class. You can also start to think about becoming an online demonstration project. So once you have completed your workbook and exported it, one of your instructors can easily take that plan and turn it into a demo and then update it whenever you begin implementation or other activities. So you can start to think about whether you can be a demonstration project. So monitoring is essentially about asking the right question that will help you detect desired conditions over time. There are different types of monitoring that you'll encounter in science and management. For example, in scientific research, we might have a question and a hypothesis, and with quality replication, we can judge deviation through time. But most of us will find this difficult, and we'll find that it requires many years before we can detect statistical change. Another type of monitoring is impact monitoring or response monitoring. And this also just describes changes over time, but it doesn't support cause and effect very well. It consists of repeated measurements done to certain standards. For example, we use forest inventory and stocking surveys to measure growth, canopy cover, ground cover, or survival of planted seedlings. Phenology monitoring is another example where you might record the dates of leaf out or bird arrival every spring. This type of monitoring usually attempts to answer a particular question that is relevant to your management goals, but it can also be expensive and time-consuming as well. So wherever possible, it's good to piggyback on existing inventories or surveys. And then we have implementation monitoring, which can be useful if we are implementing an action because of climate change, and we want to monitor the execution of that change. And this is usually a yes or no type of observation. And then another type of monitoring is effectiveness monitoring. So if you defined the desired effect, did it work? And how will you know if it worked? For example, if you install berms to slow the overland flow of water, after some time you'll need to know, is the water slowed? Does the downhill system become less inundated? So this type of monitoring is usually carefully designed based on a conceptual model of the system and what you're trying to do, and it supports cause and effect over meaningful time periods for our management. So this type of monitoring can work really well for adaptation. And the main task this week is to consider what monitoring efforts are available to us and if they need to be monitored or modified to better monitor the results of our adaptation actions. So you can also consider what new monitoring items may be required to evaluate whether you have met your management goals and objectives. So in this step, in your adaptation workbook, you'll first define your monitoring variable. So here we will identify monitoring items that will be used to evaluate whether we've achieved our management goals and objectives, or whether we have achieved a milestone that indicates progress toward your goal. So when possible, selecting monitoring items will also help you understand whether the adaptation tactics recommended in step number 4 were effective in working toward your management goals under climate change. For example, if your tactic is to underplant with future adapted species that are suitable for your site, you may choose to monitor the survival rate of those particular seedlings. And this might be somewhat different from your standard surveys in that you might need to monitor at a higher density, or you might need to monitor more frequently than usual. There might be some small tweak to your monitoring that makes it more effective for climate change. And then we will identify a value or a threshold that is meaningful for that monitoring item. So here we're thinking about the units that we're using to measure the metric, and we're thinking about that target number that's going to mean success. So based on the last example, we might measure what number of surviving seedlings would represent success. And here we have a number of 60%. And finally, we will describe how and when this information will be gathered. For example, you may monitor seedling survival every summer for 5 years after planting, or because you might have some new species, maybe it's every year. But remember, it can save a lot of time and money if you can take advantage of existing monitoring surveys or inventories. There are also existing networks like the COCORAS Rain, Snow, and Hail Network, or the National Phenology Network that you can tap into to add your data to an existing data set, and even download regional data to help make your data set more robust. So you can think of other partnerships that can relieve some of this burden of implementation as well. And so some additional examples of putting this all together. If your goals are related to invasive species control, we're looking at the effectiveness of that control measure. Our criteria might be areas identified for control will have less than 20% cover from invasive species. And then our implementation plan would be to monitor that coverage in annual invasive species surveys that happen during the late summer and fall. If we're looking at regeneration success, then our criteria for evaluation might be something like more than 50% of desirable species are in the 1/2-inch to 2-inch class. And then our implementation would be through a standard regeneration survey that happens 2 to 4 years after harvest. For one related to forest canopy cover, we're looking at least 60% canopy cover being maintained across all riparian areas. And we're looking at measuring that effect every 5 years through standard forest inventory. For one more related to watershed management and looking at total suspended solids, we're looking at a reduction of 30% of current solids at basin outflow, and measuring that monthly for the first 2 years, and then switching to annual thereafter. So there's a lot of different ways we can think about the question that we're really asking ourselves in order to judge the success and to judge our progress toward meeting our management goals and objectives. And there's a lot of potential in how we measure that and implement it as well. And our overall outcome is to develop a realistic and feasible monitoring plan that can be used to help determine whether management should be altered in the future to account for new information and observations. So you've all seen this graphic before and should have an idea of the intentionality that each step brings to our climate-informed management plan. And this process works both ways. So as we finish our monitoring plans, our metrics are directly linked to measure the effectiveness of our adaptation tactics, which describe how we will implement our strategies and our overall concepts of resistance, resilience, and transition. And then we can trace these to the management challenges and opportunities and the direct impacts on our systems for which we have identified our goals and objectives. Monitoring ultimately helps us know whether we are on track to meet those management goals and objectives. And in a nutshell, that covers step number 5. So I would like to open it up for questions, comments from the class. I think some of you might need some more coffee or tea this morning. Or maybe it's just you don't have any questions, which is great too.
There's a question in the chat. Are there an available set of forest monitoring protocols available?
An available set. Well, we probably can show you some examples from other partners that we've worked with, but I think it would depend on what organization you're coming from and what kind of system you're working in. So whether you're working, you know, on a state forest or a land conservancy, might be a little bit different, but we probably have some examples we can share. What do you think, Leslie?
Yeah, I think so. I think it really depends on the question that you're asking, and if you have a specific question that you're working towards answering, we could help identify the types of tools available to answer that question. So I would say, you know, focus more on the question and less on the tool and the step. What are you trying to evaluate, and how are you going to know that you achieved success? And if you don't have a tool to answer that, either we can help you or all of your peers in this course can help you answer that question. And if none of us can help, then there might not be an answer.
Great advice, Leslie. Anything else? Okay, well, with that, Leslie, I can stop sharing and you can take it away.
All right, give me a second here. I'm trying to find my share thing. Where did it go?
Not easy sometimes.
I know. Well, now I'm really confused.
Let me see if there's a way I can.
Hey, Leslie, hover on the bottom of your screen. Find the.
Yeah, nothing's showing up.
How about now?
Patricia can just go through the slides for you.
Yeah, that might be the easiest. But now I'm not even seeing Zoom anywhere. It's
Where
just like,
are you?
I don't know.
Is it minimized on the bottom?
Let me see here. Yeah, here. Sorry, folks. All right. Does that work for everybody?
Beautiful.
All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So we're at step 5 right now. And once you're in your workbook, what you'll want to do is go to the step 5 set of questions on the left side of your screen, or just pick next. You'll get those course materials, how you always do on the landing page. In there, you will find an optional reading, as well as the slides and the recording as usual. Once you close out of that, you will get some advice on how to complete this step. There are some resources on monitoring plans there. So folks who are looking for some additional resources on monitoring protocols, you might want to look in that little orange button there that says monitoring plan resources. So that might be able to provide you some resources on that topic. All right, so once you're closed out of there, you will get to a very blank looking screen where you're going to be adding your monitoring variables. So the first step will be to click on that little orange button on the far right side that says Add Monitoring Variable. And once you do, you'll get this little pop-up, and it says Monitoring Variable on the top, and then it will have text boxes for the 3 components that we're asking you to add. So this is all going to be based on what you want to add, and so it's going to require some work on your part to think about what the questions are that you're trying to answer. So for example, if you were interested in looking at seedling survival, your monitoring variable would be success of planted tree seedlings. Your criteria for evaluation would be the rate of survival of planted seedlings, and then you might have a threshold. So for this example, their threshold is 75% survival at 5 years after planting. Yours might be different. And then the last is the protocol that you're going to be following. So you can be very specific here. You could link to something if you already have a protocol developed. If you want to just briefly describe that, that's okay too. So in this example, we have planted tree surveys will be conducted during the regularly scheduled forest inventory. So if this project already had an inventory, they're just adding in a survey of those planted seedlings. All right, when you're done filling that out, you can click Save. And then it will ask you to apply those monitoring questions to particular objectives. So all of the objectives that you added in step 1 are going to show up here. And you can click basically yes or no, just toggle between the two. So if you have a question that's going to help you answer something related to multiple objectives, you can click yes on multiple objectives here. If it only applies to one objective, then just select that one. And if it doesn't apply to any, then maybe you should rethink why you might want to do that monitoring question. So it's pretty simple. And then once you're done with that, you can click on Add Another Monitoring Variable and just keep going through the process that way. Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward. All right, then after you've filled out step 5, there's also a homework on step 5, and it has a few questions for you. The first is, what are the key questions you'll want to be able to answer to determine the effectiveness of your recommended tactics for climate change adaptation? What are the metrics needed to answer these questions, and how or when will you collect the necessary measurements? So this can be a narrative response. You can kind of summarize what you put in your workbook. Then it'll ask you to evaluate how much you agree or disagree with a few questions, whether you can identify monitoring metrics to assess the effectiveness of your management tactics, and how you understand, whether you understand how the measurements collected through your monitoring plan could help you adjust your future management. And then the final question is, what information do you already have to help you measure the effectiveness of your adaptation tactics? So this is really important to think about because we often don't have a lot of funding for monitoring. So if you can piggyback on something that you're already doing or a partner is already doing, that is probably the most effective way for you to accomplish this. You can partner with researchers, you can partner with volunteer organizations and do some citizen science monitoring, or take advantage of remote sensing data and things that are publicly available already. So it doesn't mean that we're suggesting that you undertake some really expensive monitoring endeavor. We want you to be realistic about what you think you can measure given the resources you have. But also be very intentional about the questions that you're trying to ask. Just because you have remote sensing data doesn't mean you have to use it if you don't have a question that can be answered with that type of data. All right, so when you're done with that, you are actually done with your workbook, which is really exciting. So you can export and share your plan after that. So on the very bottom on the left side is a button that says export and share plan. There will be a little slider, jobby, I don't know what we call these things, to that pops up about sharing your story. It'll ask you to think about sharing your project as an online demonstration. This is what something that Patricia had mentioned also. So we're looking for people to share their stories of their adaptation plans. It doesn't mean you have to have implemented anything yet. It can just be in the planning stage, but we want to share stories of how people are thinking through how climate change is affecting their management and what intentions they have to adjust their management in light of those impacts. So just keep that in mind. We'll probably be bothering you a few more times before the end of the course about that. So close out of that. And then there will be another thing about next steps. And it's basically giving you a few other ways that you can engage with us as you move forward. The thing that you're going to want to pay most attention to, though, at this point is the exporting and sharing your plan through the print current version button. So you close out of that, and there is a button on the left side that says print current version. And you don't necessarily have to print it on paper. You can also print it as a PDF. So click on that, and then click OK on the pop-up. And you will get a formatted version of your plan that you can either print a hard copy of, or I would recommend saving it as a PDF. So click over to Save as PDF. So their destination would be Save as PDF. And then you can save it as any version or name you would like, and it's yours to keep and share. Any questions on that? And you can always do this right now to kind of see how things look, and then go back and adjust your workbook and print a new version as you are making changes.
So we have a question from Save Mommy about wanting to share the story, but they also want to edit the PDF. And so one tip I can give you is to save your plan as a PDF, and then when you're in Adobe, I believe you can choose to save as, and you can turn that into a Word document, which is editable. So you can, from your Adobe program, transition between a Word document and back to Adobe and have all of the editing that you want.
Thanks, Patricia.
Yeah.
Other questions on that? And if people have suggestions on how we might want to adjust our formatting, we're also open to suggestions. So we have adjusted the way this has looked in the past. So if the look and feel of the report is not working for you, we are welcome to any feedback on that. But feel free to like copy and paste things into your own documents. You can just make this an appendix in an existing plan. People have used it in a variety of different ways. All right.
Great. And then there was another question from Diana, who is asking, should you have a monitoring variable for each tactic? And I responded, ideally, yes. And once you identify what you should measure in order to track your effectiveness, then you can think about whether there are those existing surveys or inventories that might already measure that, or that could add a new metric as a component. And that being said, we know that monitoring is often idealized and we all want to do it. We want to do more of it, but it is expensive, it's time consuming, and that for implementation, you will probably need to prioritize which new monitoring metrics you decide to implement and can afford and have the resources for. But it is good to think about what you would monitor if you had all the resources available.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to have a one-to-one ratio of one monitoring question for each tactic, because there might be one monitoring question that will get at multiple tactics. So for example, if you had something about selecting future adapted species, but something about diversity, you might have one survey that you do that's going to answer both questions.
Okay.
All right. Other questions? All right, so our assignment for next time is to complete step 5, and you'll also complete your homework for step 5. There's one recommended reading we have on assessing stand level climate change risk using forest inventory data and species distribution models that Maria, one of our co-instructors, was the lead author on. And this gives you an idea of how you can use existing forest inventory and analysis data and the tree atlas tool to get at some information about what species or what areas might be more at risk. So it's more of it's not necessarily the effectiveness monitoring, but it's more of the like impact monitoring type of thing. So next week, you're going to come to session 6 ready to discuss your monitoring ideas and try to get everything done by next Monday. So next class is next Tuesday, and we will be talking about climate change communication, which is one of my favorite topics. And then in our discussion next week, we'll be talking about monitoring. So for discussion today, we'll be talking about step 4. So those of you in the Tuesday session, please come back at, I guess it's 10 o'clock Central and 11 Eastern. I'm always in the Central mindset. And then the folks tomorrow will be with Maria, Todd, and Kaylee. Any questions? We're happy to stay in the line if anyone wants to discuss anything. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, we'll see you back here at 11 Eastern, 10 Central.